Have you ever wondered why all the major news networks seem to say the same things? Why CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, and NBC all push identical narratives on major stories? Why you can predict what position the mainstream media will take on any given issue before they even report it? It's not a coincidence. It's not even really a conspiracy. It's business. And once you understand who actually owns the media, once you see the structure of consolidation that's happened over the last few decades, everything starts to make sense. The media isn't a collection of independent journalists pursuing truth wherever it leads. It's a business owned by a handful of massive corporations and controlled by a small group of billionaires. And like any business, it operates based on the financial interest and ideological preferences of its owners. This episode is going to break down exactly who owns what in American media. We're going to look at the big six media conglomerates that control virtually everything you see on television and read online. We're going to identify the billionaires pulling the strings behind these corporations, and we're going to explain how this consolidated ownership structure creates the echo chamber you're experiencing. This isn't about conspiracy theories. This is about publicly available information on corporate ownership, market share, and media consolidation. This is about understanding the business model that shapes the news you consume. And once you understand it, you'll never look at mainstream media the same way again.
Courage, compassion, faith, freedom, truth. Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to awaken America.
Let me walk you through the current structure of American media ownership as of 2026. It's dominated by six major corporations that control the vast majority of what Americans watch, read, and consume. First, Comcast. This is the largest media conglomerate in America. Comcast owns NBC Universal, which includes NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, Telemundo, Universal Studios, and a huge portfolio of cable networks. When you watch NBC Nightly News, you're watching Comcast. When you watch MSNBC's political coverage, or should I start calling it MS now? I don't even know. Anyhow, you're watching Comcast. When you watch CNBC's financial analysis, you're watching Comcast. It's all the same parent company. Now, in early 2026, Comcast did a spin-off of MSNBC and CNBC into a separate company called Versant Media. But the controlling shareholder of Comcast, Brian Roberts, maintains significant influence over the new entity. So, while there's been some restructuring, the fundamental control hasn't really changed. Comcast also owns Sky News, which is a major news outlet in the UK. So their influence extends beyond American media into international markets. Second, the Walt Disney Company. Disney owns ABC, which includes ABC News, ABC Entertainment, and all the ABC affiliates across the country, They also own ESPN, which dominates sports media. They own FX, National Geographic, and through their acquisitions, they own Marvel and Lucasfilm. And they ruined Star Wars. Just putting that out there. When you watch ABC World News Tonight, you're watching Disney. When you consume political coverage on ABC, you're getting news filtered through Disney's corporate interests and editorial choices. Disney isn't just a media company, they're an entertainment empire with theme parks, merchandise, streaming services, and massive international operations. Their news division is just one piece of a corporate structure with interests that extend far beyond journalism. Third, Warner Brothers. Discovery. This merger combined Warner Media and Discovery Inc. into one massive conglomerate. They own CNN, Clinton News Network as I like to call it, which is one of the most prominent news networks in America. They also own Discovery Channel, Food Network, HGTV, TLC, HBO, and a huge library of content. CNN has been struggling with ratings and credibility in recent years, but it remains one of the primary sources of cable news for millions of Americans. Remember that death counter that they had during COVID? Oh, the funny things that pop into your head when you're trying to talk about things. And it's all owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, a corporation with financial interest in entertainment, streaming, and content production. Fourth, Paramount Global, which recently underwent major changes. Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle, and his son David, through Skydance, took control of Paramount in late 2025. Paramount owns CBS, which includes CBS News, Nickelodeon, MTV, Showtime, and Paramount Pictures. The Ellison takeover is particularly interesting because Larry Ellison is known for his conservative-leaning politics and his support for Donald Trump. Go Larry. Critics argue that CBS is being remade to be more Trump-friendly, with recent changes in editorial leadership reflecting this shift. So when you watch CBS Evening News, you're now watching content produced under the Ellison family's control. And the Ellisons were also in a bidding war to acquire CNN in late 2025, which would have consolidated even more media power under their control. Fifth, Fox Corporation. This is the Murdoch family empire. Despite Rupert Murdoch's retirement, the Murdoch family still controls the voting stock of Fox Corp. They own Fox News, Fox Business, and Fox Broadcasting Company. Fox News is the dominant cable news network for conservative and Republican viewers. It's the alternative to the other major networks that tend to lean left. Not tend to, but whatever. But it's still a massive corporation owned by billionaires with their own interests and agendas. The Murdoch influence extends beyond Fox Corporation. They have investments in media properties, or around the globe. And their editorial perspective shapes conservative media in ways that go far beyond just Fox News programming. Sixth, well, not traditionally a media company, Amazon deserves a mention because of its growing influence in media. Amazon owns MGM Studios, giving it a major position in content production. But more importantly, Jeff Bezos personally owns the Washington Post. Amazon, as a corporation, doesn't own the Post. Bezos owns it individually. But the influence is still the same. One of the most important newspapers in America, a paper that shapes political coverage and investigative journalism, is owned by one of the richest men in the world. These 6 entities, Comcast, Disney, Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount, Fox, and the Amazon Jeff Bezos media holdings, control the vast majority of American news and entertainment. There are other players, smaller networks and publications, but these 6 dominate the landscape. What this means, practically, is that when you turn on your TV or go online for news, you're almost certainly consuming content produced by one of these 6 corporations. They decide what stories get covered. They decide how stories get framed. They decide which experts get interviewed and which perspectives get airtime. This isn't independent journalism. This is corporate media produced by massive conglomerates with financial interests that extend far beyond reporting the news. And, here is where it gets even more concentrated. These 6 companies don't just own news networks. They own entertainment programming, sports coverage, streaming services, movie studios, and content libraries. News is just one product line in a massive corporate portfolio. That creates conflicts of interest everywhere. If Disney owns both ABC News and Marvel Studios, how objectively is ABC going to cover stories about superhero movie controversies? If Comcast owns both MSNBC and Universal Pictures, how critically is MSNBC going to report on Universal's business practices? You know what your answer is? They're not going to do it, because at the end of the day, these are all parts of the same corporate structure, and the news division isn't going to undermine other divisions that make more money. This consolidation didn't happen overnight. It's the result of decades of mergers, acquisitions, and deregulation that allowed companies to buy up competitors and build massive media empires. In the 1980s, there were around 50 companies that controlled the majority of American media. By the 1990s, it was down to about 25. By the 2000s, it was down to 10. And now, in 2026, it's essentially 6. That is a massive concentration of power in a very small number of hands. And it has profound implications for the diversity of perspectives and the independence of journalism. When 6 companies control what millions of Americans see and hear, those 6 companies have enormous power to shape public opinion, set political agendas, and determine what counts as legitimate news versus fringe conspiracy theories. Understanding this structure is the first step to understanding why the media operates the way it does. It's not a mystery. It's not a grand conspiracy. It's just corporate consolidation following the natural incentives of profit maximization and market dominance. Now let's talk about the individual billionaires who control these media conglomerates. Because corporations are run by people, and those people have their own political views, their own financial interests, and their own agendas. Brian Roberts is the controlling shareholder and CEO of Comcast. His family controls about 1/3 of the voting shares, which gives them effective control over the entire company. That means Roberts controls NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, and all of Comcast's media holdings. Roberts is known for being politically moderate to liberal leaning. He's donated to Democratic candidates over the years, though he's also maintained relationships with Republicans. His political stance tends to align with corporate-friendly Democrats who support business interests while pushing progressive social policies. When you watch MSNBC's coverage, you're watching programming that's been approved by a corporate structure ultimately controlled by Roberts. The editorial decisions, the host selections, the coverage priorities, all of that flows down from the top. Bob Iger recently returned as CEO of Disney after a brief retirement. He's been the dominant force at Disney for years, overseeing the acquisition of Marvel, Lucasfilms, and Fox Entertainment assets. He's also been mentioned as a potential political candidate, which tells you something about his level of ambition and political engagement. Iger is openly liberal in his politics. He's been critical of Republican policies, particularly on social issues. He's positioned Disney as a progressive company that champions diversity and inclusion. And that political stance influences how ABC News covers stories. When Disney takes positions on political controversies, when they make statements about social issues, that creates pressure on ABC News to align with the corporate position. Journalists who work for ABC know who signs their paychecks and what positions the company supports. Larry Ellison and his son David now control Paramount. Larry Ellison is one of the wealthiest people in the world, having founded Oracle Corporation. Unlike many tech billionaires, Ellison is openly conservative and has been a major supporter of Donald Trump. His takeover of Paramount and CBS represent a significant shift in the media landscape. For decades, CBS was seen as part of the liberal media establishment. Under Ellison's control, there's been a noticeable shift toward more conservative-friendly coverage. The Ellisons were also competing to buy CNN in late 2025, which would have given them control over two major news networks. That didn't happen, but it shows their level of interest in shaping media narratives. Rupert Murdoch is the patriarch of the family that controls Fox Corporation. Even though he's officially retired, the Murdoch family still controls the voting stock. Rupert's son, Lachlan, is now running the company, but Rupert's influence remains significant. The Murdochs are the most prominent conservative media owners in America. Fox News exists because Rupert Murdoch saw an opportunity to create a conservative alternative to the other networks. The editorial perspective, the host selection, the coverage priorities, all of it reflects Murdoch family values and interests. Love them or hate them, the Murdochs have been incredibly influential in shaping conservative media and Republican politics. Fox News is basically the media arm of the Republican establishment, and that's by design. Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post personally, not through Amazon, he bought it in 2013 for $250 million, which is pocket change for someone worth over $100 billion. Bezos doesn't run the Post day to day, and he claims to maintain editorial independence, but he's the owner. He could fire anyone. He could shut down any investigation. The people running the Post know that ultimately their jobs depend on keeping Bezos happy. And Bezos has massive business interests that intersect with government policy. Amazon deals with regulatory issues constantly. They have government contracts. They're involved in labor disputes. All of that creates potential conflicts of interest for the newspaper Bezos owns. Then there's also Elon Musk, who doesn't own a traditional media company, but he controls X, formerly known as Twitter. X is one of the most important platforms for news distribution and political discourse. What Musk allows or doesn't allow on X has enormous impact on what information reaches the public. Musk has been openly critical of traditional media. He's positioned X as an alternative to the mainstream media gatekeepers. And his control over the platform gives him enormous power to shape what news gets amplified and what gets suppressed. These billionaires, Roberts, Iger, the Ellisons, the Murdochs, Bezos, Musk, they're not cartoon villains sitting in rooms plotting to control your mind. They're business people with their own political views and financial interests who happen to control the companies that produce most of the news Americans consume. That creates inherent conflicts of interest. When your boss is a billionaire with political preferences and business interests that intersect with the news, true editorial independence becomes very difficult. Journalists know what positions their corporate owners support. They know what coverage will be rewarded and what coverage will create problems for their careers. And that knowledge shapes editorial decisions, even when there's no explicit orders from above. This is how corporate media works. It's not usually about direct censorship or explicit orders to kill stories. It's about a corporate culture that reflects the values and interests of ownership. It's about career incentives that reward certain types of coverage and punish others. And when you have 6 companies owned by a handful of billionaires controlling most of American media, those incentives and that culture become remarkably uniform across networks that are supposed to be competing with each other. Now let's talk about how this consolidated ownership structure actually creates the echo chamber and narrative uniformity you see across mainstream media. It starts with the business model. These media companies make money from advertising. The more viewers or readers that they have, the more they can charge advertisers. So the incentive is to maximize audience engagement. What maximizes engagement? Outrage, conflict, emotional reactions. Stories that make people angry, scared, or morally superior tend to get more views than nuanced, balanced reporting. This creates an incentive structure where sensationalism beats accuracy, where narratives that confirm audience biases beat objective reporting, and where tribal signaling beats truth seeking. The media has figured out that different audiences want different narratives. Conservative audiences want to hear that liberals are destroying America. Liberal audiences want to hear that conservatives are fascist. So the media gives each audience what it wants, not because it's true, but because it drives the engagement. Fox News tells conservatives what they want to hear. MSNBC tells liberals what they want to hear. Neither one is primarily concerned with objective truth. Both are concerned with keeping their audience engaged and coming back for more. This is the business model, and it works. Fox News and MSNBC are the 2 highest rated cable news networks because they figured out how to give their audiences the emotional experience they're seeking. But there's another layer to this. These media companies don't just compete with each other for viewers. They also share common interests as large corporations with similar business models and regulatory concerns. They all benefit from media consolidation that reduces competition. They all benefit from regulations that favor established players over startups. They all benefit from maintaining relationships with politicians who can affect their business interests. This creates a situation where media companies that appear to compete with each other actually share a lot of common ground on the business and regulatory issues that affect them most directly. And that shared interest extends to the content that they produce. There are certain narratives that serve the interest of the corporate media establishment as a whole, regardless of whether that specific network leans left or right. For example, all the major media companies benefit from delegitimizing alternative media sources. Independent journalists, podcast networks, social media influencers. These represent competition for audience attention. So you see uniformity across networks in dismissing alternative sources as misinformation or conspiracy theories. And I could promise you that I'll go with about 85% of us are not misinformation or conspiracy theories. The corporate media has a shared interest in maintaining their position as the gatekeepers of legitimate information. So they work together implicitly to undermine alternatives that threaten their position. Another example is the script sharing that happens with local news. Many local television stations are owned by large media companies like Nexstar or Sinclair. These companies can send identical scripts to hundreds of local stations, and you'll see the exact same wording read by different anchors in different cities. This isn't journalists independently arriving at the same conclusion. This is corporate headquarters sending out talking points that local stations are required to use. It creates the appearance of independent confirmation when it's really just one source being repeated by multiple outlets. The algorithms used by social media platforms also play a role in this echo chamber effect. These algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, which means showing people content that confirms their existing beliefs and triggers emotional reactions. So if you're liberal and you engage with liberal content, the algorithm shows you more liberal content. If you're conservative, you engage with conservative content, the algorithm shows you more conservative content. So, I don't know why it shows me the retarded things that it shows me. Everyone ends up in their own bubble, seeing a curated version of reality that confirms what they already believe. The media companies understand this and produce content designed to perform well in these algorithmic systems. They write headlines that drive clicks. They frame stories in ways that trigger sharing. They optimize for the metrics that determine their reach and revenue. Truth becomes secondary to performance. Accuracy becomes less important than engagement. And journalism becomes a form of content marketing designed to maximize audience metrics. There's also the role of major investors to consider. Companies like BlackRock and Vanguard are the top shareholders in almost all of these media corporations simultaneously. They own significant stakes in Comcast, Disney, Warner Brothers Discovery, and others. This creates another layer of shared interest. These investment firms want all of their media holdings to be profitable and to maintain their market positions. This creates pressure for the different networks to not compete too aggressively, to maintain certain industry standards, and to align on issues that affect the media business as a whole. It's not direct collusion, it's structural alignment created by overlapping ownership and shared business interest. The revenue model also shapes coverage in specific ways. Pharmaceutical companies or major advertisers on news networks, that creates pressure not to cover stories that might damage the pharmaceutical company interests. You see this in how networks cover drug pricing, vaccine controversies, or pharmaceutical industry practices. The network claims their advertising doesn't influence their editorial decisions, but journalists know who's paying the bills. They know what stories will create problems with advertisers, and that knowledge shapes what gets covered and how it gets covered. Defense contractors are also major advertisers, particularly on networks that cover national security issues. That creates pressure to support hawkish foreign policy and to avoid critical coverage of defense spending or military interventions. Again, it's not usually explicit censorship, it's structural pressure created by the business model. Journalists learn what to cover or what coverage is rewarded and what coverage creates problems. They internalize these lessons and self-censor accordingly. All of this combines to create a media environment where narrative uniformity is the default, where different networks push the same stories with slightly different political spins, where alternative perspectives get marginalized, and where the corporate media acts as a unified entity in defending its interests and maintaining its position. This is the business model of indoctrination. It's not about truth. It's about engagement, revenue, and maintaining market position. And once you understand it, you can't unsee it in how the media operates. Understanding who owns the media and how the business model works isn't just academic. It has real implications for how you consume information and understand the world. First, it means you should be skeptical of claims to objectivity from mainstream media sources. These aren't independent truth seekers. They're employees of massive corporations with specific financial interests and political leanings. That doesn't mean everything they report is false. It means you need to consider the source and the incentives when evaluating what they're telling you. When NBC reports on a political issue, remember that NBC is owned by Comcast, which is controlled by Brian Roberts, who has specific political preferences and business interests that might influence coverage. When ABC reports on a corporate controversy, Remember that ABC is owned by Disney, which has its own corporate interests that might conflict with objective reporting. When Fox reports on Republican politics, remember that Fox is owned by the Murdoch family, which has deep ties to Republican establishment and conservative movement. None of this means the reporting is automatically wrong, but it means you need to think critically about what you're being told and why you're being told it. Second, understanding media consolidation helps explain why you see so much uniformity in coverage across outlets that claim to be competing with each other. They're not really competing on truth or accuracy. They're competing on audience share while serving the same basic business model. When you see the same story framed the same way across multiple networks, it's not because they all independently investigated and arrived at the same conclusion. It's because they're all responding to the same incentives and drawing from the same limited pool of sources and perspectives. Third, this understanding should make you more open to alternative media sources, independent journalists, podcast networks, Substack writers, YouTube creators. These aren't all perfect. Many of them have their own bias and limitations, but they're not part of the corporate media consolidation. They're not answering to billionaire owners or advertising departments. They're funded directly by their audiences, which creates different incentives. That doesn't make them automatically more truthful, but it makes them structurally independent in ways that corporate media employees can't be. Fourth, recognizing the business model helps you understand why certain topics get covered obsessively while others get ignored. The media covers what drives engagement and serves corporate interests. They ignore what doesn't. That's why you see wall-to-wall coverage of political controversies that generate outrage and tribal signaling, while complex policy issues that might actually affect your life get minimal attention. That's why you see endless coverage of culture war battles that divide audiences into opposing camps, while corporate consolidation and regulatory capture that affects multiple industries gets ignored. The media covers what makes them money and serves their interests. Everything else is secondary. Fifth, understanding who owns the media helps explain why certain narratives persist even when they're demonstrably false or misleading. If a narrative serves the interests of the corporate media establishment, it gets promoted regardless of its accuracy. The stolen land episode that we discussed in a previous episode, it's the perfect example. It's historically illiterate and logically inconsistent, but it gets promoted because it serves certain political and cultural objectives that the corporate media supports. Other narratives persist for the same reason, not because they're true, but because they're useful to the people who control the platforms that shape public discourse. Sixth, this understanding should make you more aware of how you're being manipulated. The media isn't trying to inform you. They're trying to engage you, to keep you watching or reading, to trigger emotional reactions that drive clicks and shares. They've studied what works. They know what headlines get clicks. They know what framing triggers outrage. They know how to keep you in a state of anxiety and anger that keeps you coming back for more. Once you recognize the manipulation, you can resist it. You can choose to not engage with outrage bait. You can seek out sources that prioritize accuracy over engagement. You can break out of the algorithmic bubble that's been constructed around you. Finally, understanding media consolidation should concern you regardless of your politics. Whether you're a conservative or a liberal, the concentration of media power in 6 corporations owned by a handful of billionaires is not healthy for democracy. A free society requires a diversity of voices and perspectives. It requires independent journalism that can hold powerful interests accountable. It requires media that serves the public interest rather than corporate profit. We don't have that. We have a corporate media system that serves the interest of its owners and advertisers while claiming to serve the public. That should concern everyone. Because when 6 companies control most of what you see and hear, those 6 companies have enormous power to shape reality, set agendas, and determine what counts as legitimate discourse. That's too much power in too few hands. And it has consequences for the quality of information available to the public and the health of democratic institutions. The media you consume every day is not independent journalism pursuing truth. It's corporate content produced by 6 massive conglomerates owned by a small group of billionaires: Comcast, Disney, Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount, Fox, and Jeff Bezos. Media holdings control the vast majority of American news and entertainment. They decide what stories get covered, how they get framed, and which perspectives get airtime. The billionaires behind these corporations, Roberts, Iger, the Ellisons, the Murdochs, Bezos, and others, they have their own political views and financial interests that influence the content their companies produce. The business models of these companies prioritizes engagement over accuracy, narrative over truth, and profit over public service. They're not trying to inform you. They're trying to keep you watching, clicking, and sharing. Understanding this structure is essential to being an informed media consumer. It doesn't mean everything the corporate media says is false. It means that you need to think critically about what you're being told and why you're being told it. Seek out diverse sources, support independent journalists, question narratives that serve corporate interests, and recognize when you're being manipulated for engagement rather than informed for understanding. The consolidation of media power is one of the most important and under-discussed issues in American society. 6 companies shouldn't control most of what Americans see and hear. That's too much power in too few hands. But that's the reality that we're living in. And the first step to dealing with it is understanding it. Make sure you check out everything at Truth in the Darkness. Visit TITDUSA.com for independent media that's not controlled by corporate conglomerates or billionaire owners. We're funded by our audience, you guys. That means I answer to you. I don't answer to advertisers or shareholders. Check out my podcasts, support my work, and be part of building an alternative to the corporate media machine. Know your sources. Question the narratives. Think for yourself. I'll see you next time.